Hello, I'm Jessamine Sarmiento, and this is Hacking Hunger.
You see patients in the most horrible states, and you can have patients who come in one day and the next day I'm packing them in a body bag. People are dying left and right here.
When Ebola spread through Western Africa in 2014, it killed more than 11,000 people.
As we gather here today, the people of Liberia are in crisis. The Ebola virus is spreading at alarming speed. This epidemic could kill hundreds of thousands of people in the coming months.
20 cases yesterday, 40 cases today, and you know that tomorrow it's going to be 70. These are real people with real stories and real lives.
Now it's back. This time, the Democratic Republic of Congo is at the center of the epidemic, and it's at a critical phase.
The aid agencies and local officials are waging war on the virus, but they're losing the fight. They cannot contain the disease. So organizations like the World Food Programme have ramped up their response.
2-year-old Charity fights for her life in this Ebola treatment center. She was admitted today with her critically ill mother, Kabua Safi, who lies isolated in another plastic cube, too sick to tend to her little girl.
Since November of last year, more than 3,200 people in the DRC have contracted Ebola. Of those, close to 2,100 have died.
Can you stop it? Can you stop the spread of this virus? Is it possible?
Yes, it's possible. And we will win the fight by educating them, sensitizing them. Because at the beginning, people were hiding in the forest, but now they're coming to us.
The Ebola virus kills in terrifying ways, shutting down the body's organs and draining victims of the fluids that keep them alive. And it's extremely contagious. Even dead bodies can still transmit the disease. That means traditional burial customs must be skipped.
They put his body safely away in a bag. To prevent the spread of Ebola, no one could touch the body of anyone who had died with signs of the disease.
The Global Health Media Project made an animated video to help frontline health workers communicate more effectively with communities affected by Ebola outbreaks.
It was too great a risk to follow all our traditions. But we still honored grandfather in the time of Ebola.
One approach that has helped curb the spread of the disease is to trace people who might have contracted the virus and limit their movements. This is why WFP has been distributing weekly food parcels to contacts, people suspected of carrying Ebola, so that they don't need to leave their homes to buy food while under medical observation.
We reached a distribution center where hundreds were queuing up for food. And there was something special about this group. Each one has been in direct contact with a victim of Ebola. They're all considered high risk.
The more suspected cases stay in one place, the less likely the virus will spread. The WFP food deliveries, a large sack containing rice, beans, oil, and salt, are an incentive to minimize movement and part of the containment strategy.
We knew that Ebola was serious and a very severe disease, very contagious and very often fatal.
This is Dr. Maurice. He's a doctor, but he's also a patient who recovered from Ebola.
We expected to die. My wife was treated at the same time, but I recovered before her. We were told that Ebola kills up to 90% of the people affected, so I was one of the 10% who survived. It was a joy for the whole family. We thank the WFP, which continues to supply food supplies with high nutritional value to all Ebola patients.
Ces vivres à forte valeur nutritive à tous les malades atteints par la maladie à virus Ebola.
The situation in the DRC has been made worse by insecurity in the area. This is the first time in history that an Ebola epidemic is occurring in an active conflict zone. But in the midst of violence and in some of the most challenging conditions, Ebola responders are working around the clock to ensure people can get the information, care, and treatment they need. One of those people is WFP's Jacques David. He has worked in the DRC for 5 years.
Yes, the food crisis in DRC is very serious. We have 15 million people living in food insecurity, which means that they struggle every day to find anything to eat. And on top of that, we have 5.8 million women and children suffering from acute malnutrition. It's a huge paradox, actually, because DRC is a very fertile land. It has enough fertile land to grow corn, beans, rice, and to feed the entire Africa. So the good news is that this situation is not irreversible thanks to the huge potential DRC could demonstrate. But this potential is totally underused so far.
So that's very interesting. And of course, with various kinds of interventions, a lot can be done. But what I'd love for you to address is you mentioned there's about 15 million people who are in urgent need of food. And that number, if the reports are correct, has doubled since 2017. So in 2 years' time, that's a huge escalation. What's making that happen? I know the conflict in DRC is a driver of a lot of this, and maybe you can address some of that.
Yes, conflicts here are the main driver to hunger. Just imagine this. When there is a conflict, you have armed groups attacking villages and people have to run for their lives. Actually, they leave everything behind to find a new place to live and where their lives are not threatened. So this is how they become internally displaced in their own countries. But when someone is displaced, he doesn't have access to his field, he cannot grow his food, and he can't farm anymore. So he loses access to his livelihood. And most of the time, someone who is hungry in DRC is someone who hasn't been able to make his crops. So the situation is quite complicated, and to improve these worrying figures, of course, WFP can support these people in this emergency situation, but we definitely need stability and peace to prevail all over the country.
Yes, and to make matters even more complicated, there's Ebola. This is obviously a huge issue that's driving a lot of other issues in the country. So can you talk a little bit about what's happening with Ebola now? I know there have been about 2,000 deaths so far and many more cases. So potentially the crisis is worsening. So can you talk a little bit about the scope of the problem and how long it's been going on?
There are two big crises in DRC. First one is the hunger crisis, and the other is the Ebola outbreak. It's the 10th Ebola outbreak in DRC. Actually, this one started more than a year ago, and it's the largest outbreak ever in DRC. It's taking place in one of the most complex areas, also because of the conflict situation. The fight against this outbreak is very complex and difficult and it has claimed the lives of more than 2,000 people so far, and people are still dying every week. It's one of the most complex situations in which humanitarian organizations have to respond. First, because some people still think the virus just doesn't exist. These people just think that Ebola is nothing but a witchcraft or something, and it's very hard for them to recognize that somebody can be infected by this virus. So it's a state of denial for many people, and then there's a community mistrust towards humanitarian organizations and sometimes manipulation too. And due to this mistrust and denial, many Ebola deaths are taking place in the families, in the communities, and not in the hospital. So it means that these deaths are undetected, which contributes to contaminate other people and to spread the virus. Another challenge is the insecurity. There are several armed groups fighting in the Ebola-affected area, which inhibits our access to affected people. And when I was there, on 2 occasions, we had to postpone our mission to distribution points because of insecurity. Apparently, someone had been killed at night, and there were angry people in the streets shooting gunshots and things like that. And also on some other occasions, our colleagues must have a blue helmets escort to be able to transport the food to some remote distribution points.
You recently returned from a field mission where WFP was preparing some of the interventions. Can you explain to us what was happening on that field mission? What were you seeing? Tell us about the people that you met.
I attended food distribution to contact persons, and contact persons are people who have been in contact with Ebola patients, and they might have been infected by them. So it's very important that these people stay at home as much as possible to avoid the spread of the virus. And it's important they are kept under medical observation to see if the virus develops itself within a period of 3 weeks. So this is why it's important and strategic to distribute food. But this food is also vital to address the food needs of these contact persons, because as they are recommended to stay at home, they can't go out to go to the markets or to farm their lands. So I could see and I could hear that these people were very thankful to WFP for receiving this food. I also met Dr. Maurice. He's a cured Ebola patient who explained how important it is to receive this food to be fed in a very proper way, because the virus gives you very high fevers, diarrhea, and vomit, and so on. So, which makes you lose a lot of weight. So when you have good food, it's great support for your body to recover better. Cure patients like Dr. Maurice receive the WFP food on a monthly basis. So it helps his body to recover, and it helps also with the reintegration within the community, actually. We met cured patients who were actually stigmatized by their own families or communities, despite they had overcome the virus. And when you overcome it, you become immune and you are never going to cause contamination to anyone anymore. But it's very difficult for people to accept this. So when you come back with your family with food to share, it makes things easier. Yeah, so it was very interesting to be at the heart of the situation that people face on a daily basis. And Dr. Maurice's situation gives hope to the patients he works with, because he's the proof that it's possible to survive, especially if you go quickly to the Ebola treatment center.
Jacques, thank you so much for the work you do. It's such dangerous work, and you're saving lives. It's so important. I want to talk about some of the programmatic elements of that work. People here in the U.S. hear about school feeding programs all the time. How does something like school feeding fit into the larger work that you do? And if you could, I'd also love for you to give a description of WFP's role in the logistics piece of all of this, which I find fascinating, and I don't think many people understand your role in doing this.
Regarding this Ebola response, WFP distributes food, and that's the main operation. But besides, we also have further developed our school feeding program, because we realize that it's really important to address the several needs of the whole community to gain their trust and to show them that we are not just there because of Ebola, but also because we care, we really care about them on a holistic approach, on a holistic point of view, and we really recognize that there are also other important needs in addition to the Ebola situation. So we are supporting 4 times more schools than last year. We're reaching to 100 schools, and we're going to go beyond that, most probably. And it's a great support for the children, as they can eat at least once per day and they can attend the course in a more focused way. Regarding the logistic aspects, WFP's expertise and huge capacities are very well known. So we provide humanitarian community with warehouses, with trucks, with camps to host the medical and humanitarian staff in some Ebola hotspots. And we are really offering a huge logistical support. And logistic is something that people don't usually see, but it's absolutely essential for any humanitarian operation. Without that, nothing can be implemented on the spot, actually.
As you know, most of our audience listening to this podcast right now is based here in the United States. So what can you tell the listeners about why people here in the US should care about a crisis that's happening so far away?
Well, first of all, the US is a country with great values, and so many American people are very watchful about the respect of human dignity wherever in the world it can be threatened. And I think it's the first reason to care about this crisis, because, people here are facing this epidemic, and it's really causing a collective trauma. It killed more than 2,000 people. And even when there is one Ebola survivor, you can be sure that several other people in his family have died. So it's really needed to do something to alleviate the suffering of the people here. And the other reason is that there's a risk the virus can spread to DRC's bordering countries. And DRC is a huge country, actually, which is why the World Health Organization has called this outbreak an international health crisis.
So, Jacques, I understand the funding for the work being done in DRC is less than what's necessary to get the job done. Talk to us about where the funding is. How does funding help solve the issue, and what WFP needs to ensure it can effectively fight Ebola and hunger in the country?
We were just talking about why people in the US should care about this Ebola outbreak. And maybe some of them remember what happened with the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014. At the beginning, the situation got out of control because the response was too small and was underfunded. So that's what we have to avoid in DRC, and people are working very hard to avoid this situation. And fortunately, they've succeeded quite well, because the outbreak is contained in only 2 provinces of the DRC. But there are still many needs, and it costs money, actually. And it's really the moment now to boost the Ebola response so that things can be kept under control, and so that in the coming months, hopefully, the virus can be defeated. And it's better to spend money now than a huge amount of money later when the situation has got out of control. I have to say that the US is a great donor to WFP operations in DRC, and we still need their support, and as well as the support of other and new donors.
Well, what happens as you wait for new donors to come to the table? What happens when there's a gap in funding?
It means that people already deprived of many things become even more vulnerable because either they don't receive the only food they can possibly access to eat, or they receive a reduced cash allowance. So in all cases, they can't feed themselves properly, and or they can't eat at all, and so their lives might be at stake, actually. So most of all, I hope stability and peace will prevail in DRC, because that's the best way to address definitely this food insecurity crisis. And because once there is peace, people can go back to their villages and start feeding themselves again.
Since the beginning of the outbreak in August 2019, some 500,000 people have received 7,000 tons of food from WFP. Another 440,000 people will need help within the next 6 months. But the response is still insufficient to meet the magnitude of the needs and the complexity of the situation. To learn more about WFP's efforts to support people during emergencies like this and others, visit our website at wfpusa.org.